J'ouvre maintenant la séance. Bienvenue à la réunion.
Hello and welcome to meeting number 21 of the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs. I would like to welcome the committee's new clerk, who is here with us today. She is accompanied by Ms. Miriam Burke, just for this first day. Also, on behalf of committee members and on my own behalf, I would like to thank Mr. Cedric Taquet, who has been supporting us. He is listening to this meeting, so thank you for your work. I would also like to welcome Mr. Angelo Iacono to the committee for today.
1082 and the motion adopted on Monday, October 3rd, 2022, the committee is meeting for a briefing by the Auditor General of Canada on report number 2, processing disability benefits for veterans. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Je pense que la vérificatrice...
I believe the Auditor General of Canada is used to committees, so she'll know how the interpretation works and how how the tools work. So now I would like to welcome our witnesses. Again, thank you for agreeing to appear before the committee on such short notice despite your heavy workload. From the Office of the Auditor General, we welcome Karen Hogan, the Auditor General of Canada, Martin Dompierre, Assistant Auditor General, and Isabelle Marcellet, Director. Ms. Hogan, you have 5 minutes to make your opening remarks. Over to you. Thank you. Chair, thank you for this opportunity to discuss our report on disability benefits for veterans, which was tabled in the House of Commons on May 31st, 2022. I would like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. We are very pleased to appear today and to see the committee's interest in our work. We recognize that our relevance is built on the value we bring to parliamentarians and to committees such as yours. The objective of the Veterans Affairs Canada Disability Benefits Program is to compensate veterans for the effects of service-related injuries or illnesses on their lives. Veterans include current and former members of the Canadian Armed Forces and the RCMP. We looked at whether Veterans Affairs Canada was taking appropriate actions to reduce wait times for veterans to receive the disability benefits that they were entitled to in order to support their and their families' well-being. Delays in receiving benefits may have an impact on access to care or access to other programs and services administered by the department. In some cases, veterans may feel a lack of respect or appreciation for their service. Despite the department's initiatives to speed up the processing of applications for disability benefits, veterans were still waiting a long time to receive compensation for injuries sustained in their service to Canada. We found that veterans were waiting almost 10 months for a decision on a first application. This is much longer than the department's service standard.
Francophones, women, and RCMP veterans had to wait longer than others. There were various reasons for the delays experienced by members of each of these groups. Of particular note, RCMP veterans waited on average of 38% longer to receive a decision on their applications than Canadian Armed Forces veterans. Part of this could be explained by the fact that the funds paid by the RCMP to Veterans Affairs Canada did not align with the volume of applications that required processing. In addition, we noted that both the funding and almost half of the employees on the team responsible for processing all applications were temporary. The department also lacked a long-term staffing plan. In recent years, Veterans Affairs Canada implemented several initiatives to try to make application processing more efficient. However, the department's data on how it processes benefit applications and the organization of this data were poor. As a result, neither our office nor the department were able to measure whether and to what extent each initiative improved efficiency and helped reduce wait times. Furthermore, the department did not always calculate wait times consistently, which meant that veterans waited longer than the department reported publicly. Overall, the impacts of these shortcomings means that more work is needed to reduce wait times. Our veterans are waiting too long to receive their benefits. Veterans Affairs Canada and the RCMP agreed with all 4 of our recommendations. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We'd be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have.
Je vous remercie beaucoup.
Thank you very much. That was exactly the right amount of time. We will now move over to questions and answers. We will start with, on my list I have Mr. Fraser Tolmie or Mr. Caputo.
Okay, so Mr. Fraser told me for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mrs. Hogan, for your hard work putting this report together. I know that it's not a single effort, and I appreciate all the hard effort and work from your team, so thank you very much for joining us today. Ms. Hogan, in your report on page 16, it states, because of the poor quality, I'll give you a second to find that, page 16. It says, because of the poor quality and organization of the department data, neither we nor the department had implemented, contributed to change in wait times for some applications. Do you stand by that statement?
Absolutely. I stand by all the statements in our audit reports.
Okay. So would you agree that the data that you speak of is actually veterans' files concerning health issues? That's what we want to...
So the data that we were speaking of here was how the department gathers the files, but then how they store and track where they are through the application process, in addition to the information that's contained in them. So. Right.
So the number, the data represents the number of files, which are the number of health concerns that are being brought forward by vets.
Yeah, and so an application, I think there's a nuance to be brought, that an application might include many different conditions that a veteran is seeking to have benefits paid on. So part of that was the concern about how they even managed whether it was a condition or in an application. But yes, it's the files that Veterans Affairs has.
Right. So part of the responsibility as this committee is to ensure that vets who have these files that they're being processed within a proper amount of time. And so I just want to bridge that information that you're referring to as data as humanizing it and representing people who have concerns. Is that a fair assumption to make?
Yes, it's a fair assumption that each bit of data is an individual waiting to hear news on a benefit.
Right. Okay. I'm just going to be very observant to the chair, because I'm sure he's going to be giving me the red card quite a bit today. Well, you know, Mr. Chair, concerning this audit, it's not only a concerning report, but it's a damning report. And it it raises further issues and concerns. So this is not a reflection on what you've presented. But it compounds a concern that we've been having in this committee over and over again. In the committee, we had the minister here on February 2nd, 2022, where the minister specifically said that the information we received in a report was inaccurate and that the data was incorrect. So if I put what he said back then and the information in this report where it's hard to get data and information, there's a consistency and a trend that I don't like. He further went on to say that the numbers and projections were going to go down and that he would provide updated data. The minister's letter, which was dated in April, and the Auditor's General report in May 1 month later, shows that there's a lack of information and a trend that I'm very concerned about. If information and data is not provided to the Auditor General accurately, how can we as a committee do our job? How can the problems of backlog of veterans' files and data, healthcare concerns be fixed? If the information is not provided accurately, then the following reports, such as the Auditor General report, the Ombudsman report that we received earlier on, the PBO report, and the committee's report, which all rely on data, how can we make an accurate assessment and improve the wait times that veterans are waiting for to get their files processed quicker? So in the past, when we had the Ombudsman report, there was an attempt to discuss the Ombudsman report and say that they needed to change their information. The auditor is giving us information and saying that the data is not accurate. And so I'm grateful for your report because it highlights a concern and a trend that has been going on for quite some time. So thank you very much for your information. How do you think it would be best for you to get more information or more accurate information in the future?
Excuse me, Mrs. Hogan, but I'd like to remind the MP told me to leave also time for the witness to answer, but your time is over, so please leave enough time to have an answer, to have a response. So right now I'd like to go to Mr. Angelo Iacono for 6 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Chair. Hello, Ms. Hogan. Could you talk a little bit about the disparity in wait times between men and women, and also between Anglophones and Francophones? Certainly. We found that, in general, veterans waited a median of 39 weeks to get a decision on their application. Women waited for 47 weeks, and Francophones waited a median of 46 weeks. The reason these groups waited longer do vary. First, I'll talk about Francophones. The report of the Veteran Ombudsman noted the issues, noted that Francophones were waiting longer. We investigated whether there had been an improvement, and there had been, but Francophones are still waiting longer than the average veteran. A Francophone unit was set up within the department to process Francophone applications, and that did improve results. What is more, the department set up a bilingual group, which also helped matters. But there remains a lack of staff able to process Francophone files, and that's why the wait times are so long. As for women, oh, sorry, go ahead. I'll speed up. For women, there are a number of different reasons. One that we observed is that on the application form itself, there was no way to indicate name changes related to marriages. Women are more likely to change their name when they enter into or leave a marriage. And when there's no way to indicate multiple names, it leads to delays in processing files and seeking information. And so what could be done to reduce this disparity? I'm wondering if you looked into that at all. We looked into it to a certain extent. First, VAC noted the issues surrounding women and added and committed to changing the form. I believe that has already taken place. As for Francophones, it's just a matter of staffing, having more people who are able to process applications in both official languages. Perfect. Could you talk about the $140 million in funding contributed by the government after you published your report? What effect has it had? And what more could be done? What could be done in the short term by Veterans Affairs? I'll admit that the extra money came in, was contributed after the audit, so I'm not certain why the money was spent, and I'm not sure what the department did with it. During our audit, we observed that there was more funding going to the problem, but only on a temporary basis. And there was a need to ensure that term employees would be able to work on the files over the long term. The thing is, many staff responsible for processing files would leave Veterans Affairs for a more stable job. What is more, new employees require time to train. So when these employees leave because their job is only a temporary one, it makes funding less effective. So we have argued for a stable funding formula, one that focuses on the long term and not just bandage solutions to address backlogs. I believe Mr. Dompierre can add on to my answer. In the report, we note that the department lost 43 employees during the period reviewed. This led to a significant impact in capacity to process files. So staffing should be used to ensure a long-term approach. Thank you very much. How did Veterans Affairs respond to each of your recommendations? And what do you think about the department's responses? The department accepted all of our recommendations. They agreed to work to improve the situation. As for funding, they said that they would work with central agencies in order to come to a more permanent solution. Chair, how much time do I have left? You've used up your 6 minutes, so thank you, Mr. Iacono. Thank you, Ms. Hogan. Now we'll go over to Mr. Desilets for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Hello to all my colleagues. and thank you for coming before the committee. I devoured your report. It was fascinating. It confirmed a number of things I had in mind. One thing that I came away with is that the gap between men and women has diminished, so we're on the right track. It is no longer the problem it was once upon a time. But the issue I have with your report is that it's from June 30th, and of course that's nothing against you. So the gap between women and men is going well. The size of the backlog is also decreasing. So work has been done. I'm a Quebec Francophone, however, so of course my major issue is the treatment of Francophone files. We saw that it takes 29 weeks to process Anglophone files, something like 46 weeks for Francophones. That's certainly not your fault, but it's something you found in your report. The Ombudsman has already raised the issue. I raised the issue. The gap between Francophones and Anglophones is unacceptable. This has come up before. And now in your report, you have also pointed to the gap. I understand that the department reacted well to your recommendations, but this has been going on for 6 years. People have been recommending things for 6 years. This needs to be improved. You need to hire. You need to make things better. It's been 6 years. And the department is responding well. But the gap between Francophones and Anglophones remains a problem. So there's something systemic going on. Certainly, the department has made commitments, sent a team of people to Montreal. But it looks as though we are facing a systemic structural issue. And the department doesn't seem able to address the Francophone-Anglophone gap. I've been on the committee for 3 years. Given the information that you have, would you consider another audit on Veterans Affairs which would focus specifically on Francophone applications? Would you rather answer a different question? It's actually been 7 years since Veterans Affairs has met its own service standards. Regarding the backlogs? No, just their service standards in general. They have service standards stating that they will process an application in 16 weeks. They have not met their targets in 7 years. So it's important to bring up because it's not just one bad year. We're talking about a 7-year period. That's entirely too long to go without any improvements. You spoke about Francophones, and yes, we actually saw an improvement following the report by the Veterans Ombudsman. Of course, while the situation for Francophones has improved, the situation facing Anglophones has worsened. So it evened out somewhat. There needs to be a long-term solution to address the increasing number of applications, not a temporary solution. Do I plan to look at Veterans Affairs once more? I wouldn't look at the department writ large. I would look at specific groups of veterans. Having said that, I do think Veterans Affairs needs the time to implement a plan. You are more patient than I am. I mentioned 6 years. You're talking about 7. A number of people were hired to process Francophone files. Did you get to meet with these staff at all? No. We did not speak to people processing Francophone files. But you are convinced that there are 25 people in Montreal working on Francophone files? The number 25 is not in the report. I don't know where you're getting that number from, but there is a Francophone unit in Montreal. How large is it? Okay. Do we have any sense of their work? Are they working entirely on Francophone files or both Francophone and Anglophone files? And are these Francophones working on the files or semi-bilinguals? I really don't have all these details. We didn't look at the exact breakdown of staff. We know there is a unit in Montreal, and we know that there is a bilingual unit here in Ottawa, if I'm not mistaken. The bilingual unit prioritizes Francophone files. That is all I could provide you regarding staffing and exactly who does what on a daily basis. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. Now we'll go over to Ms. Rachel Blaney for the next 6 minutes. Thank you.
And just before I start, I also want to wish all the best to our previous clerk. I really appreciate his service to our committee, and I'm sad to see him go. I want to thank everybody from the Auditor General's office for your incredible work. I found this report very enlightening, and I really appreciate it. My office was just recently contacted by one of the veterans that's a regular with us, and he told us that he sent an application in March for a mouth guard because he's grinding his teeth when he sleeps. He got a request for additional paperwork in June. He uploaded all of that to his MyVac account in July, and then was told that he had to wait 33 weeks to get a response to that. So I think that's a pretty clear example of what's still continuing to happen. So I guess my question to you is, one of the recommendations that you brought forward was providing useful waiting time information for veterans to provide that. And I'm just wondering, what does that mean? And because I don't know all of their systems, what things do they need to do to improve that so that veterans get the information and that we can see those wait times go shorter? It seems crazy that for something that simple, they're waiting that long.
So I hear you about, the wait times. The useful information, I guess, is about making it clear to veterans that, the website might say the service standard is 16 weeks, but you have to read into what that means. 16 weeks from a completed application in 18% of the cases. There's a lot of caveats to that. That starts, so a completed application is only once all that back and forth has happened with the veteran. So I can appreciate that a veteran thinks I sent in my application in March, but it's not complete if they're still going back and forth with you looking for additional information. But the clock starts ticking once it's a completed application. So I think part of that is making it clearer to veterans, when that sort of starts and when the expectation starts. Then it's about ending it at the same time, right? You might land on a decision about this is an eligible injury, but then the whole assessment of the severity needs to happen, which establishes the amount of that will happen. But they stop counting when they've made a decision, but there's still a wait time to establish the severity, then to process the payment to a veteran. I think some transparency about that helps level set expectations for veterans. Then it's about finding out where all of those bottlenecks are and actually tackling them in a concrete way. And that's what we saw, is that they don't have that information. They can't tell you why, where something sits in the process longer and why. And so they're unable to really target measures to improve the processing time.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up, that idea of data and how important it is, and I found that really interesting. And I've heard this in other ways that we've tried to figure out issues, and it often comes back to the fact that the data and the way that it's collected does not provide for an opportunity for us as MPs to understand or our constituents to understand, and I think that's incredibly frustrating. So, you have recommendations on the data. I'm just trying to understand what the process. I understand you said earlier, we got to let them have a little bit of time to try to figure that out and implement it. But what is the process, and is there any sort of accountability that we can call on the government to address these issues in a more timed fashion, as opposed to waiting perhaps another 7 years?
Well, we did a report back in 2014 that just looked at mental health applications for veterans, and in that report we actually recommended that the department should look at what is causing the delays and then implement measures to address them. I'm not sure they've at least tackled that first part, which is identifying what's causing the delays. Mm-hmm. So some of it is having a better case management system. I mean, there's so many out there. There's so many ways of managing this data to be able to track and know how long a file sits in a certain area. We have one exhibit where we talk about how they started to track now, which is new. They didn't track in the past. They can now track how long a file sits once it's decided that it's complete before it gets assigned to an adjudicator. Mm-hmm. So that's important to know. If that's a bottleneck or if there's a delay there, then you can implement measures to fix that. But it's about tracking a file in a consistent way, but also about tracking it in a quality way. Some of the data quality issues we saw was that a file was put in there and the date of entry looked like it had been 10 years ago. And when we challenged, they said, oh no, that was a typo. And it had to be fixed. So some of it's human quality, but some of it's about having the right system to track an application through the steps.
This is so interesting. So one of the things that I'm hearing really clearly is that they may not have that double oversight too, where somebody goes through and just does quality control and looks at making sure that the date wasn't entered in so it looks like 10 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay.
Well, and I think that's why we ended up with medians instead of averages, right? There were some outliers that if we used an average would have really skewed the results, and we had to really do a median calculation, even though it's a harder concept to get across, but there was some of those data quality issues that really caused us to have to go that route.
Thank you.
15 seconds. That's okay. Thank you. So now let's go for a second round, and we start this round of 5 minutes with Mr. Frank Caputo. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you as well, Madam Auditor General and your staff for being here. I reviewed this report with interest, and I used to teach, and I suppose when I was looking at this and this performance, I think we can all agree that this report discloses what is essentially a failing grade. It just seems as though we're not getting to where we need to be, and the last 7 years since 2015 haven't really gotten us there. I tried to find something positive in this report, and I take it you would agree that there's not much positive that we can really glean from this. Is that accurate, the situation?
The way I would describe it is that the government's failed to meet a promise that it made to its veterans, that it would take care of them if they were injured while they protected and served our country. So,
yes, and that's a sacrosanct promise. I mean, to me, that's as basic a promise as we can really get. And not only does your report say they failed to meet that promise, it's been an ongoing issue. And really, from what I take from your report, and I'll ask you if you agree, there's really not a tangible end in sight to that promise being met. Would you agree with that?
I think there was a lot of activity that was meant to try and improve it and meet that promise, but they weren't able to do it in the period of our audit. No.
And what I further take from this is that we have a situation where I believe it was $138 million was spent to address the backlog that service standard hasn't been met in 7 years. Is that correct? Does that accord with your understanding?
I'm not sure where the $138 million came from. I'm sorry.
Oh, recently. The government recently has
recently? If that was the recent announcement, I'll defer to your knowledge
on
the recent announcement.
Well, the bottom line is this. We've got the backlog, though, is being addressed by employees, and those employees are temporary. Is that right, generally?
About half of the employees that are in the unit that services the demands are the applications are temporary. Yes.
Right. And of those temporary employees, of those half, certainly when you're a temporary employee, you want to have permanent employment. That's pretty obvious. Is that right?
I would think most people would prefer permanent employment, but some people might like temporary. But I think in this case, we saw that there were individuals who left for more permanent positions within the federal public service.
Right. So the cycle essentially repeats itself because we have a situation in which the department trains people, and then after a short time, they're leaving to go elsewhere, and the backlog can't really be addressed because of the fact that a permanent employment contract is much more alluring than a temporary contract. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. You raise a great point. Onboarding any new employee takes time and effort and money, and then training them, and then they need to get to a place where they become really efficient at doing their job. So that's a costly churn if you're losing people because they're not in permanent positions.
Right. Now, based on what you saw, would it have been more prudent to hire these people permanently rather than temporarily? Just noting that attrition happens in the federal public service, things like that.
So one of our recommendations was to find a long-term sustainable staffing solution and a staffing plan. I think a lot of the permanent funding was provided in order to address the backlog. And to me, that was just one part of the issue. The issue is really that the organization has not been able to meet its service standard in 7 years. So, it's not just about addressing the backlog. That maybe needs permanent staffing, but there's a long-term, more sustainable solution needed to meet the level of demands in general, in addition to then addressing the backlog.
Well, certainly, and when we talk about a long-term sustainable demand, it's obvious that needs are really there when it comes to RCMP, women, and francophones as well, correct?
I think all of the veterans are waiting 39 weeks, which is far longer than the service standard. Then there are subgroups waiting even longer. So I think the demand would be all veterans, but yes, there's a unique need to address women, francophones, and RCMP veterans.
Oh, okay. Is there anything positive that you can point to? The only thing I could see was at 2.39, and even then, it said the data was too poor. So when I read this report, I see nothing positive that we can point to, and that's discouraging. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I think we saw some improvements here and there. I don't believe that the department knows why those improvements occurred, but I think overall, veterans waiting 39 weeks is far too long.
I agree. Far too long. Thank you.
Mrs. Hagan. Thank you, Mr. Caputo. And now I'd like to invite Mr. MP Torrance Rogers, excusez-moi, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome to our witnesses. Appreciate having you here today, and thank you for your report. I realize, of course, that your report goes back a ways from April 1st to September 30th, 2020. And I look at some of the numbers that we've heard in this committee from the minister and others when some of these questions have been posed to them. And you keep referencing 7 years. So is that the last time an audit was done, or what happened beyond that? Was there problems before the 7 years? Is this something that's been systemic for a longer period of time?
So I know that our first, I guess I just want to point out clarification. Our audit period ended in September 30th, 2021, just so that we know that we actually went to 2021, not 2020, as the member mentioned. We did an audit back in 2014. The ombuds did an audit in 2018. But when we looked back to see when was the last time the service standard was being met, which is 16 weeks in 80% of the cases, it's been 7 years since the department was able to demonstrate that they were meeting their published service standard.
All right, thank you for that. And I wonder, I asked that question because I wonder if you know what's happening today at Veterans Affairs, since your report and since it was submitted, because since 2020 there's been an investment of $340 million and you know, 140 referenced by my colleague earlier. So, you know, have you seen, as a result of that, are you aware of that investment and how much there's been any improvements in Veterans Affairs because of that investment? And should it make a big difference, that kind of investment?
You want to take it? Go ahead.
So maybe to refer to the report, paragraph 38, we are talking about 16 initiatives that were launched by VAC in order to improve processing time, to improve sort of the quality of the data that they had. So the number of initiatives that they're presented or at least going forward, they have not yet achieved the end of that process of implementing those results. So according to the department, this will all come to sort of finalization in 2024. So we've seen some initiative in order to improve, but as we were doing our audit, we were not able to look at specifically some of these outcomes around those specific initiatives.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think you referenced there were 43 employees lost at one point.
Yeah.
And when I hear those numbers, and I think about the pandemic and what we went through during the pandemic, that impacted government operations and so on, I just wonder, you know, from your perspective, are we on the right track to getting back to trying to address these backlogs? Because none of us are happy with this. And obviously, we need to take better care of our veterans. So do you think we're progressing towards where we should be in meeting the timelines and standards?
One of the main findings in our audit was that because of the poor management of the files, that neither, and the lack of really traceable targets on all those initiatives that we mentioned, that neither we nor the department were able to demonstrate that the initiatives were actually making things better. Right, and what we're seeing is that there wasn't really an improvement in the wait times. So I do appreciate that eliminating files in a backlog is an improvement, because any file that is treated, any veteran who receives a communication about their benefits is an improvement, but it's not dealing with the root cause, which is that it takes far longer than the service standard right now to get notification about a file. So I can't tell you, based on our audit, it doesn't look like they're headed in the right direction, but I haven't looked at anything past September of 2021.
Sure. And you know, I have members of my family that are military, and I'm hoping that once they are in a position to retire and need services, that they can get them in a timely manner. So we all have a vested interest for all of our veterans that have served either the military or the RCMP and so on. So we hope that we're on a better track to trying to address all of these issues. And so do you think just larger investments from government might help?
Oh, I'm not the first to tell you. I don't think that money is always the solution to a problem, but I think in this case, a stable funding for permanent staff to help deal with the increased volume is a solution for this issue.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that. We're done?
It's over.
Thank you.
Et là, nous allons...
We will now move over to two very short 2.5-minute rounds. First, I would invite Mr. Luc Desilets to take the floor. Thank you. Do you believe the 16-week standard is attainable? I don't think it's attainable under current processes. So again, this might be a structural issue. You noted that money doesn't solve all problems, but there's just something broken in the system. That was a recommendation that an external group made to Veterans Affairs to review the targets, or perhaps to set up two separate targets, one for first-time applications, and split it up so that it would be clearer for veterans. Veterans Affairs rejected the recommendation because they believed their initiatives would solve the problem. We all know that the clock starts ticking, as soon as the file is complete. Do you have any sense of the time between the tabling of a file and the end? It depends on a number of factors. There's a back and forth process, and Veterans Affairs doesn't always have all the information it needs. Then there's the issue of medical information, which needs to come from departments. All of this adds more time. Are we talking weeks, months? If you look at paragraph 18 of the report, we see it's a roughly 22-week period. Yes. So it would be the difference between 48 and 39 weeks. So a 9-week difference. Inaudible for the interpreter. So 2.5 more months. Yeah, so the median is an extra 9 weeks. Thank you very much. All right, we will now move over to...
6.5, please. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Chair. It reminds me of a couple of years ago, the PBO, of course, did a report, and one of the things that he mentioned was that to actually start addressing these things in a meaningful way, the disability backlog specifically, there would need to be a significant amount of hiring people based on how long it was taking to get it done, that this was the only way to move forward. And one of the things that came up, of course, was how many people were being hired temporarily. And we've heard testimony that because people are being hired temporarily, some of them are finding permanent jobs in other departments within the government, therefore not staying. And we know that it takes a while to train people up to be able to have that full capacity. And you mentioned in the report as well that there's no long-term plan on hiring, which we know is a concern for everybody in this country and across the world. We're really struggling to find people. So I'm just wondering, you've mentioned a couple of times that need for permanency and stable funding to provide support to have that permanent workforce. I'm just wondering if those two things, if the concern is that the temporary people don't have the knowledge that they're going to be able to stay so that they're moving, and it just continues to have people be retrained. And then the other part of that, is there any data being collected by the department to track if people are being hired on temporarily and then leaving, and just capturing that?
So I think we mentioned in a paragraph in the report, Martin mentioned it earlier, where they had estimated that when 43 individuals had left over a period of time in the audit, that it was the impact was about 5,000 applications not being able to be treated. So there's a real clear impact between those temporary employees leaving. I do think that the department needs to do a good assessment on what is the permanent staff that they need. There is likely a need for some temporary individuals to deal with peaks and backlog, but there is a clear need to have a more permanent, stable workforce, because the demands we saw over a 5-year period increased almost 75%. So that's a real reality, that there's just more demand. And so the staffing needs to line up with that.
Well, and it makes sense if it's been 7 years since they've met their standards, that perhaps that would be essential in moving forward.
Thank you so much, Ms. Blenay. And now I'd like to invite Mrs. Kathy Morgenthau for 5 minutes, please. Yes.
Thank you. Really appreciate you being here and having the opportunity to review this report. I want to be positive and say that this can be dealt with, but the 7 years is very discouraging. I'd like to refer to 2.20 in your report in regard to 2014, when you published the audit report, Mental Health Services for Veterans. You indicated there that in a 1-year period, 75% of decisions on first applications for mental health conditions were processed within the 16 weeks. And then for the current audit, also a 1-year period, from October 2020 to September 30th, 2021, you found about 41% of decisions on first applications for mental health conditions were processed within the 16 weeks. I appreciate what you say here. In fairness, twice as many were processed, but the number of applications were 3 times as many. So this is looking at, I'm thinking, the reality that Afghanistan in 2014 was no longer a theater, and veterans were coming out of that system of 14 years, and we know from what we hear at this committee that it takes them a while, those that do become veterans and are no longer part of the armed forces, takes them a few years to decide they're going to deal with these things. So I can see that as a reality. However, this is where we are right now, and the numbers continue to grow, so there wasn't that foresight, I don't think, in realizing what we were going to be dealing with as the younger veterans came online. However, it's very clear from what I'm seeing from you, temporary funding needs to be permanent funding. Temporary employees, we need more permanent employees. This is a very challenging job. The expectations for people who are trying to process this very complicated business of meeting the needs of veterans. And then the data system, you're also saying, is weak. And I noticed in reference to your recommendation, 2.52, Veterans Affairs indicated that they're working on that. They realized it was a problem in 2019 in implementing it, that they were in the early stages of maturity, which I think means not working really well yet. And as well, they indicate they're switching platforms and indicate that the decommissioning of the old one will take place in about 5 years. So this problem isn't going to go away easily. So I just want to share one thing with you and then get your feedback. This report is to September 2021, and we are now aware that in April 2022 of this year, the department instituted a new policy to issue funding for mental health services upon application. In other words, leave all that paperwork. Let's just get this money where it needs to go. And when we're talking mental health, I mean, that is ground zero for so many of the problems that our veterans are facing. And so they said, provide the funding upon application and sort the paperwork out after. So this is going to give the impression that there's an increase in faster processing because there's 0 weeks. But at the same time, I applaud it and wonder what you think in looking at all these different lines of service that they need. Is it time to just say, look, for every application that has come in on anything, that we should trust our veterans to know their conditions, deal with this backlog, get people in there who are going to serve long-term, and provide the efficiencies that we need to be able to serve our veterans well?
There was a lot in there that I'd like to try and address, but I want to start with paragraph 20 maybe, and that's
Okay.
exactly why we put the numbers of the files, right? We were looking for a positive before, and I said there are some improvements. So a positive here is that, yes, more files were treated, but there was such a large increase in
Right.
demand that it just put more things in the backlog as well. There was recognition in our report that the department does have some information about how many types of conditions are traditionally validated and then funding is given. When it comes to mental health, that is one of them, I do believe, that was up there, in they know that a significant portion are awarded some sort of benefit. So that is a solution to get funding into the hands of veterans sooner, because the long wait times has a direct impact on their well-being.
Exactly. The sanctuary trauma is huge.
Much. It was only 5 minutes, so now let's go to Mrs. Rachel Valdez for 5 minutes, please. Sorry.
I'd like to thank the Auditor General and team for their hard work in producing this report and for providing it to the committee today. I just want to clarify, so The report says we analyze files for which a decision was made during the 18-month period from April 1, 2020 to September 30, 2021. Is that correct? That's the dates, that's your reporting time period?
That is the audit period.
Okay, thank you. Can you confirm the date that you did the analysis, meaning like, did you pull files from that time period, or were you doing the analysis real time during that time period?
So we received full access to their database, but our audit work started after that time period. So we gathered evidence all the way up until January 31st, 2022, related to the time period of April 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2021.
The reason why I'm asking is because when I think about April 1st, I was about to launch something that I was working on. And then that March, my daughter was supposed to start kindergarten, and she wasn't able to because of the pandemic. So the reason why I'm reflecting on this time period is because I've spoken to many organizations in Mississauga, Streetsville, who struggled during that time, and our lives were completely disrupted. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's bringing me really bad flashbacks right now. But so when I'm thinking about that time when you're observing the team and what they would have been going through, going through a lockdown, trying to figure out staffing shortages, we all know what that was like, and it was a tough experience. So when I'm thinking about, I mean, I see your data. I mean, it's telling, right? But I mean, what can you say about the process of you reviewing these files, and if you ask questions during that time about what the staff went through, because you had to perform your observations current, but then you were looking back during a very tough time in our pandemic?
So I do believe that in that time frame, we actually saw an improvement in the number of applications processed during the pandemic, partially also because there was a decline in the applications submitted during the pandemic. So I do think we considered whether or not there was a reduction there, but we actually saw an improvement in the treatment of in the closing and processing of applications at the start of the pandemic. I do point you maybe to an exhibit we had, an exhibit 2.4. We actually looked at, we divided up our 18-month period of data into 6-month chunks, and we looked at the first 6 months of April 1st, 2020 to September 2020, and then we did the same thing for 2021, just to see if there would be an improvement. And actually what we saw is that, the median, if you look on that, the median actually got really better. Mm-hmm. But the files that were further down, like the extension went even longer. So there was some improvement, but yet other files waited just longer. So it was really hard to know if it was timing, if it was data, if it was application. There is just a need to have a better handle on their information and where the bottlenecks are.
Thank you. And I just want to make a comment. The recommendations you made regarding the data, obviously whenever we have better data, it's easier for you to, actually measure the service levels, et cetera. So I do appreciate your recommendations around that. The other questions I had were around, you had suggested that VAC and RCMP work together more closely. Can you clarify in what ways that they could do better? And because you kind of touched on it, but can you elaborate a little bit more on those details?
Absolutely. There's two areas. Well, some is sharing medical information, right, which needs to be done in a timelier way. There are service standards, but oftentimes they were not met in sharing the medical information. That's a really key step to getting to the place where you declare that an application is complete and you can actually start processing it. The second had to do with funding, because the Veterans Affairs receives funding from the RCMP in order to process RCMP applications, and they put aside a sort of a dedicated unit to deal only with RCMP applications. They were just not able to keep up with the volume. So they need to work together to get the right funding, to understand the application volumes that are coming, so that there's progress towards meeting the service standards.
Thank you.
Mrs. Valdez. Thank you, Mrs. Hogan. Now let's go for a subsequent round of questions, and I'd like to invite Mrs. Anna Roberts for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for all the hard work that you've done. And before we dig into my comments, I'd like to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. It's a time of the year that I have to do a lot of reflections, and one of the things I reflect on is how do we protect the people that protect us? And recently, I've had the pleasure of meeting with numerous veterans who shared their stories with me, and I will tell you it was very emotional. I don't think there was a dry eye in the House. And one of the things that they mentioned was that they felt that Canada let them down, that there was no support for them. As soon as they left their posts, they were abandoned. To hear some of the stories and the amount from one particular gentleman that I spoke with extensively in private, and I promise not to use his name, I'm going to keep it confidential, as he requested, who was on suicide watch. His friend wasn't so lucky. He waited 17 months and gave up. For the individual that I'm speaking about, he was encouraged not to give up and decided to seek private help, which he did. Through the generosity of the community, they were able to raise money to send him to a program that was able to help him understand that his life is valued. So my question here is, it's been 7 years. If we go to the hospital and we are in danger, I'd like to think that we would get immediate attention. Do you think that by continuing, it's like doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result? We're not getting it. We have funded, we've given them money, there's no accountability as far as I can see from this report, which helps us understand what do we need to do to change it? How do we make a difference so that we can encourage these veterans that we're not abandoning them?
So as I mentioned in my opening remarks, that is what we, is a real consequence of it taking so long to get benefits to veterans, is that they feel the lack of respect for their service, and sadly there are some terrible consequences, as you've outlined. What can the department do differently? I really do. I agree with you. I'm a huge proponent for you can't just keep repeating the same thing and hoping that the outcome will be different. And so it's really doing something differently. They launched, as we mentioned, 16 initiatives to try and improve their processing. They set targets for 2. So you track, you only measure what you set out to track. And if you didn't set any targets, then you wouldn't know whether you were achieving what you set out to do. So I really do think it's about doing differently. I can't tell the department how to run its day-to-day, but it is clear that something needs to improve. And I don't believe it's just changing the service standard. I think it's about actually figuring out the issues and tackling them one at a time so that you can get there. I think that another member mentioned a possible solution, but I'm not a medical professional and I don't have all the information that the department has. So they do really need to sit down and find, I think, creative, maybe out-of-the-box solutions than just repeating the same things.
I guess I'm trying not to keep my private hat on when I was in private industry. So if I was given a budget to work with, my boss would expect results. So in order to prove my results, I would have to have data, and I would also have an independent eye overseeing my performance. Do you think that this would help if we had someone on a more regular basis to analyze the backlog so that this situation doesn't continue to reoccur?
100% there with you on data. You need it. You need it. You need disaggregated data. They could do a better job there too in order to help identify areas to target support and different approaches. As an independent oversight, well, every department has an internal audit shop that they can turn to, and every department should be able to try and get that external help if they need it. So I think there's lots of ways that should be explored by the organization.
So oh, I didn't see the red card. I'm sorry. I should pay more attention. I apologize.
Mr. Tolmi used to look at me to see if I'm using it. And I'd like to invite MP Sean Casey for 5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The audit period for this study was an 18-month period that ended in September of 2021, right? So everything that's in the report is basically a snapshot in time that's now a year ago.
Absolutely. It looked at every audit has to end at some point, and that's where we ended, yes.
I'm not pointing it out as a weakness at all. I understand. So any investments that were made, any hiring that was done, any changes in practice, any reduction in the backlog over the last year was not the subject of your audit?
No, it was not. My audit period ended September 30th, 2021.
All right. On page 6, you indicate that the service standard had not been met for 7 years. So if we go from the September 2021 end of the audit period back 7 years, can I then conclude that the last time the service standard was met was in fiscal 2014?
I would say that's probably accurate. We do say that we gather evidence all the way till January 31st of 2022. So, I'll give or take a few months. I'll give you. I don't know the exact date that I would go back to hit the 7 for you.
I heard you say earlier that one of the keys to improving the performance at the department would be more full-time people, right?
I do believe a stable, permanent workforce would help improve the processing of applications, yes.
Would the converse also be true? If there was a decision made to downsize, to fire, to let go, to lay off permanent full-time people, would that have a negative impact on meeting the service standard?
Well, I would only be presuming now, but if you terminated the employment of permanent employees who are training and onboarding your temporary employees, it's likely to have a really huge impact on processing times, yes.
I don't think you need to presume it. History has told us that. There's something called the Deficit Reduction Action Plan that resulted in a dramatic downsizing of the civil service, including Veterans Affairs. That downsizing was actually greater in the Atlantic region, where many of these claims are processed, and we see the results starting in 2015, starting when the impact of those severe cuts began. If I could take you to page 7. And this is the point that Ms. Wagenthal made. So at page 7, when you made a comparison to 2014, which is right around the time that the Deficit Reduction Action Plan was landing at Veterans Affairs, 2,160 decisions were within the 16-week period for mental health. And if I read it correctly, you indicate that in 2021, 3,802 decisions were within the service standard. So despite the drastic cuts that were made at that time, there is an increase of 76% from 2014 in the amount of mental health claims that are being dealt with within the service standard. Mm-hmm. So from 2,160 to 3,802, right?
Correct. The first mention is our previous audit, and then there is an increase in the demand, an increase in the processing. Absolutely. Still a large portion not meeting the service standard, however.
Yeah, yeah. And a massive number of files. So there's a lot more files being processed within the service standard, and there's a lot more files that are being processed in total. The increase there is more than double, 221% by my calculation.
Yes, these are just the mental health files, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Casey. Thank you, Mrs. Hogan. Alors, nous allons...
We will now move over to two brief 2.5-minute interventions, starting with Mr. Luc Desilets. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Casey, you are an extraordinary politician, we'll put it that way. One day I hope my talent can rival yours. We have all these numbers, all these tables, all these reports. Everything is pointing in the same direction. But it has been 7 years. We have not met our targets for 7 years. A few weeks ago, I went to the funeral of a veteran, and I was chatting with his wife. Now, we have numbers. We'll have more numbers going forward, but at the end, there's just something not working. We have not been able to meet targets for 7 years, and the targets aren't even that ambitious, so something is broken. When I was at the funeral, the lady said to me that she no longer believes in the system. Her late husband, who took his own life, felt rejected by the government, left behind. I don't want to be dramatic, but that is something that I heard. Do you have anything to add in terms of recommendations? I know your report is full of recommendations, but do you have anything useful, something that we could, a path to follow, some way the government could get back on track? I see the yellow card. I am saddened by the results. I am frustrated. Sure, there have been increases. More files were processed, but at the end of the day, the wait times are unacceptable. And the wait times are out of line with service standards. The government needs to change its approach, and it needs to improve processing, because right now they have broken their promise to our veterans. Thank you. Now, for 2.5 minutes, Ms. Rachel Blaney, over to you.
Thank you so much, Chair. That was a really great intervention, and I was really moved by it. I just wanted to say that. And can I just say the interpreter was phenomenal in interpreting the passion. I just did a very good job in English for you, Luke. So one of the questions that I have is around the RCMP applicants. I appreciated the information that you gave, but I noticed that both for the RCMP applications, the medical information, it was 85 days. Sorry, this is page 8. 85 days in 20 to 21 fiscal year, and then 35 days the following year. And then for the Canadian Armed Forces, it was 67 days, and then down to 23 days in those 2 years. So I guess I'm just wondering, did that directly have to relate to the fact that we were experiencing a pandemic? Or was there any explanation with those significant changes?
I do believe that we did hear that some of the information was because of the pandemic, but the rest could be obtaining the files. It could be how many conditions that they're trying to gather information about. So there's many factors that can contribute to the delay, but the pandemic was absolutely one of them.
And so we also heard that just overall RCMP veterans are having to wait significantly longer than the rest of the veterans, and it sounds like there's a desire to see a sort of a better contract, maybe to have enough staff to support them. But I'm just wondering if you could explain, if you know what the difference is, like where is that? And what I hear again and again is identifying those bottlenecks is almost impossible. So I'm just wondering about that.
So you're right that we found that our CMP veterans waited about 38% longer than Canadian Armed Forces veterans. We think that one of the reasons is some of the funding, but again, really difficult to nail down exactly why. There are so many bottlenecks, and the information's not there to tell us, does it sit somewhere longer, does it get blocked in a different spot? But we were only left to conclude that this could be one of the reasons that our CMP veterans are waiting longer.
So I just keep thinking about the impacts of the bottlenecks here and what it has on other areas. Like I think of the Veterans Review and Appeal Board. I'm just wondering if you have any reflection on where it gets stuck here. How about those other places that veterans go to get help? That must delay them to be able to access those resources as well.
Well, the majority of our statistics relate to the first-time application, but yes, there's more time if you ask for a reassessment or if you try to challenge the decision. So we didn't go that far, but I know that the veterans ombuds went there in their report, but we didn't go that far. Yeah.
Thank you, Mrs. Elgin. Now, for 5 minutes, let's go to MP Fraser-Tolmie. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would like to say, you have to forgive me. I'm a vet as well, and so my passion for this report could maybe be expressed as disappointment in not what you've produced, but in what you've revealed, and I would echo the sentiments of a number of people around this table, where we seem to have gotten report after report after report, and yours is the cherry on the top. And so you're also the last one to be giving us this information. And so when we continually get that message that service is failing, and then I hear, as a member for only 1 year, that it's been failing for 7 years. It is very, very disappointing. And so I go back to the comments that you've made in your report, where you're concerned about the data. And when I look at that, I'm concerned about the integrity of how we move forward, and how do we translate what you're saying as that this is a failed service, and how do we fix the problem? Because you can throw money at the situation, but if you don't know what the key mechanisms of where that failure is, we're just going to be throwing money at it. And we're going to be kept told by the minister that, oh, it's going to get better, it's going to get better, it's going to get better, but we're going to continue to get reports like what you've just given us. I have a question for you, and that question is, from the start to finish, what is the finish time for you and in your report of when a file is closed?
So we respected, actually, first I'm going to start by thanking you for your service. I'm sorry, you mentioned that you were a veteran, and I think it's important to do that. We followed along the lines that the department follows, right? We hold the department to what they say is their objective. So a file for them is completed once they have all the information, and it ended at different dates, but we ended it, normally where they ended it was when a decision was rendered. But I think like anyone, as you sit back and look in a common sense way, which is why we talked about what happens before the file is determined to be completed, and the bit after you render that decision, because a veteran thinks about that as the whole wait time,
yes,
not just the wait time that the department measures. And that's why we felt it was important to talk about the front end and the back end.
And I appreciate you validating, because that was my thoughts when I'm reading the PBO report from, forgive me, from September 28th, 2020, where on page 1 it says in March 2017 the numbers of pending applications was 20,693, but in March 31st, 2020 it had reached 49,216. That was prior to the pandemic, so it almost doubled. And of these, 22,138 were considered complete and were waiting only for a decision from the department. Well, that vet is waiting to find out what that decision is and when they're going to get service and when they're going to be looked after. Would you agree with that?
I would agree that I send in an application anywhere as a vet would do here for benefits. The second I've handed it over, the clock starts ticking for me. And that's why I think it was important to talk about the before and after, as I mentioned. But the department does delineate their service standard calculation at a smaller area, which again is even more concerning when they can't meet that service standard when it's a smaller area. Right?
There was comments made earlier on around the 7-year period, and it was my understanding on good authority that some of the offices that may have been closed down were moved to Service Canada offices, and that offices were opened 1 year later. So based 2016, that's correct. But there was a promise made by this government to improve services. Could you expand a little bit more on what you were saying about the broken promises?
Excuse me, Mr. Tholme, the time is up. I'm so sorry. You will have the possibility to ask your question a little bit later. So right now I'd like to invite MP Wilson Miao for 5 minutes to participate virtually. Please go ahead, Mr. Miao.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Ms. Morgan, for all the work you and your team have done. First, I would like to get into the backlog that has built up in the past 7 years that wasn't met in the target. Do you know how much exactly that the government had funded the VAC on this part, causing all these delays in the past 7 years?
Question, how much money that they've contributed to dealing with the backlog?
Not just the backlog, but in the past 7 years of not meeting the standard delivery time.
We did not look at, I guess, their budget spend over the last 7 years to know how much was directed towards the backlog versus the processing of applications in general. We just weren't able to dissect the information that way. So all I could refer you to is the funds they've spent, and you'd have to ask the department if they could break it down between backlog and regular processing.
No problem. Thank you. I would like to go in further with the CSDN system, the client service delivery network that is being used. Do you know how old is that system right now to deal with all these processing applications?
No, I'm sorry, I don't have that information. We didn't look at the IT system itself. We looked at the management of the files, the adjudication process.
So the delivery time can be caused because of a system issue that may cause inconvenience to serve our veterans that have served us in the past.
I can't comment on whether the IT system is causing delays. I think the management of files files are mismanaged in some cases. We definitely saw that. And an IT system should support you and facilitate case management. So I can't comment on whether it contributed directly or not. So I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. And referring to the report on page 23, one of the responses to 2.52 mentioned that the current system will be decommissioned in 5 years and will be moved on to a new system called GC Case. Do you feel this will help expedite or at least prevent any application being missed or parts of the form filled that are not filled incorrectly be addressed?
I really can't comment on that. I did not audit GC Base. I don't know the way it's configured or how it will be used by the department, so I really don't have any intelligence to offer on whether it would improve the process.
No problem, Ms. Ward. Because I remember, I believe our colleague, Mr. Desolé, did mention about that money might not, solve all the problems that we have, but something is pretty much broken in this system to cause the delay that we're experiencing right now. And with the recommendation that's being brought forward, we did see a change in improvement. However, since the report was tabled and right now it's only a few months in, we do see an improvement on some of the service being provided to our veterans. Am I correct?
I really can't comment on how the IT system or the aging system is contributing to this, but I would think that any system that can't give you complete and accurate information to help you understand where the process, where a file is slowing down in the process, is not a system that's serving you well if you're trying to manage files.
And I'm aware that there's over 50% of the staff that's helping with these application process are temporary workers or under a term.
More than about 50% of the employees in the whole unit that treat all of the applications are temporary employees, yes.
And with the support of the system and technology, I'm not sure whether or not you can give me an answer, since you have told me that this might not be something you have studied in, but do you feel the support of technology will integrate the application process down the future as well?
Well, I think in general, I would just tell you that you hope that your IT systems make you more effective and efficient at what you do. I think that's just a foundational place. I hope IT would support everyone in that way. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And how much time I have, Mr. Speaker?
Your time is over, so thank you so much. And,
thank you very much, and thank you.
Voilà, merci. Donc, Madame.
Thank you. Ms. Hogan, we will now move on to a fourth round of questions. I would invite Mr. Caputa to take the floor for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, one of the things I will note, just following up on my colleague Mr. Casey's intervention, is he did refer to a deficit reduction plan. But we also have to realize that in the 7 years since, the budget has changed, and I believe the budget now is certainly higher than it was in 2015. So I just make that note for the record. In any event, one of the things that I was struck by when I was looking at this report was the data, because we are dealing with what I would call highly quantifiable issues. So what I mean by that is this: the date somebody applies is quantifiable, right? If it's April 1st, you know it's April 1st. The date somebody's file is completed is quantifiable, May 30th. We know it's May 30th. And the day the file closes, or the date that the decision is made, you understand what I mean when I say that the completion date, we'll call it that. So with all that in mind, how is it that we don't have good data when it just, again, I'm just looking at this out from the outside looking in. How is it that we don't have good data when what we're tracking is so simple?
So you're absolutely right. A date is a very quantifiable thing. As long as there's no human error in inputting that date, it's a very easily measurable system. But when you're trying to understand why a process, like an adjudication process goes through many steps, when you're trying to understand what elements within a process are causing delays or slowdowns such that you can't meet the service standards, you need to be able to measure as something moves through all of the steps in the process. And that's where the quality of the data really starts to break down, is that the department doesn't know how long something might sit in one area, what's causing the delay. So it's, we use data as a real general term, but it's about having information about, where the file is. So, if you could put a tracker on it, finding out where it goes and how, when it slows down and when it doesn't slow down, would help you identify measures to target the slowdown.
So if I understand you correctly, we know what happens at the beginning and the end, but we really don't know what happens in the middle.
Well, when they decide that it's complete, and then we start calculating, but there's some confusion in the middle. Absolutely.
Okay,
It's a messy middle.
I'll tell you, I'm even more despondent because, and here's why. Because we don't know what's causing, from what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't really know what's causing the issues, right? We've put money into this, doesn't seem to have worked. Hopefully we'll have more efficiency. We don't know where the lag time is. Is it waiting for documents? Is it waiting for somebody to look at something after documents are received? So that's the source of my despondency. Does that make sense? As in, we don't know what's even causing these delays in the middle. So how are we to ameliorate them?
Well, the department had done an external review, and they identified some areas that they thought were problem causes, right? Which is why there are 16 actions that they were trying to implement to improve the processing times. The issue is they didn't do a very good job at tracking whether this one initiative improved the processing time, then did this other one maybe counteract that and go the other way. So there was just a lot put in place without being able to know whether or not it made things better. So I think it's a few things that are contributing to we're not really sure why. What initiatives improved or slowed down? We couldn't say, and neither could the department.
And we're still at that point today then, where we still don't know.
Well, we were at that point September 2021, yes.
So yeah, and when I say today, I'm sorry. As of the date of your report, the point I'm trying to get at is this. I'm quite worried moving forward because we identify the problem. There is this backlog, and this backlog is not only too high on a moral level, as in people are waiting too long, but it also, from a policy standpoint, doesn't meet what we expect it to meet, the 16 weeks in 80% of the cases. Then you put on that, we've had an efficiency problem. I'm sorry, am I done? Oh, okay. 20 seconds. You have an efficiency problem with retaining workers, and then on top of that, we don't really know what is causing the internal delays. I suppose I'm feeling a little bit hopeless. And
I may, Mr. Chair,
Sure,
I'd
go
maybe
ahead.
point the member to paragraph 21. We actually targeted 33 files. We didn't do a random sample, so we couldn't, tell you that it was the whole population, to try and do exactly what you're saying. Why and where did it slow down? And we listed some areas, but you'll see that sometimes it's things sitting in the wrong queue. So there's a whole bunch of reasons. I just point the member to that paragraph, perhaps. Mm-hmm.
I would also like to inform members that after this fourth round, given that we started a little late, if they wish to make up that time, we need unanimous consent. For the moment, let us continue with Mr. Angelo Iacono. 5 minutes, please.
Please note that I'll be sharing my time with my colleague, Sean Casey. Mrs. Hogan, throughout your audit, were there any overarching themes you noticed with regard to veteran affairs and processing of disability claims, and also with respect to the backlog?
Are you looking for the themes as to why things were so slow? I guess I'm just trying to make sure I understood the question.
Yes.
So I guess I would sit back and say that we saw that what contributed to the long wait times were the waiting for information, the back and forth, some file mismanagement in some cases, the large increase in applications contributed to the slow wait times. And then we believe that the fact that both funding and half of the employees processing all of these applications were temporary. So we think that those are really the three places I would highlight as what's contributed to the long wait times.
Thank you. And since your report has come out and money hasn't been injected, what do you foresee as future trends at VAC? Will the number of incoming applications continue to rise or drop? And is the department doing enough to increase their output? Any recommendations, etc.?
Well, I don't believe I'm in a good position to be able to predict whether applications will grow. Over time, applications have grown. I think we can also predict that as our servicemen and women are deployed, that you would expect that when they return, there will likely be an increase in applications. So I really couldn't predict that, but I believe that the department should be able to do that. It really is their job to know and make sure that they have the manpower in place to handle the applications.
Well, your comments are always well appreciated. Thank you. And I turn it over to my colleague, Sean.
Thank you very much, Mr. Iacono. I guess I should start by responding to Mr. Caputo, his indication that the budgets at Veterans Affairs increased in 2015. Indeed, they did. The government that took office in 2015 felt that the budget and staffing cuts were a very cruel way to treat our veterans, and they fixed it. I'd like to turn to page 12 of the report, and specifically the paragraph where you reference public service capacity. And you indicate that, what I take from this is that in the middle of your audit term, so in January of 2021, the spike teams were introduced to deal with the simplest of cases, the least complicated cases. So this happened in the middle of your audit, right? Mm-hmm. And then back on at paragraph 2.48, you did an analysis of 3 distinct 6-month periods during the course of your audit. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, what you found is that the spike teams worked. What you found is that there was a significant increase in the processing of less complex cases. Is that a fair conclusion for me to reach, that the spike teams that were introduced in January worked?
I don't know if I would attribute it to the spike teams, but there are many initiatives that were ongoing throughout the period of time, and so there was clearly an improvement in the median time to process applications. However, to meet the 80% of files, that 80% pushed out further months. So that's why I say there's some initiatives that improved processing, and there are clearly some initiatives that didn't improve processing, but the department's unable to identify which ones those were.
I take your point. Mm-hmm. At page 1, you referenced the pain and compensation benefit came into effect on April 1, 2019. So 1 year before you started your audit, there was a brand new benefit that came into place. Did that have any impact on processing times? The fact that there was a previous benefit that had been there since 2006 under the new Veterans Charter, which was replaced a year before you commenced your audit.
Yeah, I do believe that what you're referring to is the fact that a benefit was replaced with another one. Yeah. So that would likely, I imagine, have an impact on the determination at the end, but I'm not sure if it would have had an impact on the actual processing of an application, but I don't know that information. We didn't triage our work based on that.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to correct the statement I made earlier regarding unanimous consent. No, it does not require unanimous consent. We started 12 minutes late, so the committee is fully allowed to continue 12 minutes overtime. Now I would invite Luc Desilets to take the floor for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'm a former school principal. If I had to make a school work with 50% temporary staff, it would have been impossible. So I see a possible solution before us. Human resources are the most important resources available to an organization. However, what I'm seeing is that veterans are not being respected. And it also seems that the government is not taking their own employees seriously. 43 employees leaving during your study, that doesn't make any sense. Why would an organization take on so many temporary staff? You're right. Our public servants do great work. The same can be said for Veterans Affairs. These are people who work hard and to improve the lives of Canadians. I don't know if it was the department's decision to have so many temporary employees or a decision made based on the fact that they had temporary funding. You cannot hire a full-time, an indeterminate employee when you only have temporary funding. So yes, it can be difficult to manage an organization when so many employees are able to leave, yes, at any given moment. Because if something is temporary and a few years later you look and it's still temporary, it just doesn't make any sense. It's not as though the government is saving any money, especially given that they're not able to meet their own needs. Do you have any information to share? One final comment. Temporary employees and churn are costly. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Désilets. Ms. Blaney, 2.5 minutes.
I'm going to take it. So my first question is, you mentioned the challenges for women and you talked about the name change. Was that the only issue that you could find, or was there any sort of idea that there might be other challenges for why women were waiting longer?
Again, I think it was difficult for us to identify. It was clearly one of the issues that had been identified through the gender-based analysis plus that the department had done. We saw it materialize in the length of time, and they're trying to fix it. I do think there might also be a challenge on the medical side of treatment. There are not a lot of women in service. Mm-hmm. And so understanding all of the impacts of post-traumatic stress syndrome and other issues on female service members is really not that well known. So there is some of that information missing that might cause other delays. But again, we couldn't really pinpoint them all, but I think those were two areas I would point to that would cause delays for women.
The other question I have is, in your time there, do you know how many files that were processed were denied? Do you have that number at all?
No, I'm sorry, okay. I don't have that number.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to check, because one of the things that we keep hearing is that a lot of veterans organizations have been very clear that they would like to see automatic approval and then a review process after, and then a fixing up of the system, so that people get the services, veterans get the services immediately, even if it's a baseline, and then additions may be added. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that sort of idea of the process being automatic approval and then review to make sure that the veterans get their needs met.
So I do think that process has some merit when it's founded with some information, right? Mm-hmm. As I mentioned earlier, if you know there are certain conditions where the majority are always approved, and there is a base level and then it's adjusted based on the severity of the injury, that is a likely solution. I do caution no upfront vetting and payment controls. Mm-hmm. There is some due diligence that needs to happen, right? That no upfront vetting comes with a cost of a a need to make sure that you look at it in a fulsome manner post-payment.
Thank you
So
so
it's-
much.
it's a
Sorry,
give
I
and
have to
take.
say one thing. Chair, sorry to bother you, but it has come to my attention that the documents from StatsCan that we received for the survivor pensions benefit study that we did are not published on the website. So the testimony is, but not those documents. I'm just wondering if we could get that fixed so that we have that information publicly. So I'll just leave it to you, and maybe next time you guys can let me know. Thank you so much.
So much, and I'll get back to you on that. And now for 5 minutes, I'd like to invite MP Kathy Rogenthal. Please, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much, Chair. I'd like to comment and get your feedback on your final recommendation, which says Veterans Affairs Canada should work with central government agencies to establish a sustainable long-term resourcing plan for processing disability benefit applications in a timely manner. This plan should consider the number of applicants the department expects to receive and the efficiency it expects to gain from its process improvement initiatives. So you do a lot of studies, I assume, of different departments. In this case, I thought it was very telling, the response from VAC. And the comment is between 2015-16 and 19-20, they experienced a significant increase in disability benefit applications, 40% overall, 75% were first time. And they talk about bringing in temporary funding on a number of occasions to hire staff to try to address the issue. But I thought this next sentence was important, and I'd like your feedback on it. The department was not able to fully assess the impact that would result from the introduction of new programs and other commitments. That, to me, as someone in business, would go, you're making decisions without fully looking at the potential negatives, the potential positives, the highest costs to you, possibly the least. This, to me, says there wasn't enough consideration as they bring these programs in to consider what it was going to cost, and clearly what it has cost is a significant backlog in veterans receiving their supports.
So I do encourage you maybe to invite Veterans Canada to explain in more fulsome detail their response. What I believe it's pointing to is that some of the funding received was used to put in place those 16 strategies that we talked about that they hoped would improve processing time, and I don't think they were able to be able to know whether that would help or not and how to assess it all. But that's why I think they need to work with the central agencies, right? Getting temporary funding is a solution for certain issues, absolutely. But this is a really long-standing one. Right. And so I do think that you need some foundational information to know what's the right level of resources that you need to just treat the applications. Right. And there's been a sizable increase in applications. Right. Then what do you need to deal with the backlog? And what do you need to implement improvements? Some of that can be temporary funding and should be temporary funding if you're just trying to implement measures that will then have a long-term enduring effect, right?
Okay, thank you. Do I have any time left? I do, okay. I just wondered, in the process that you went through over that time frame, it was COVID time frame, correct?
The audit period,
Right.
It did include part of COVID, yes. We
Right.
started April 1st of 2020.
Right. So did you have any sense of the dynamic around all of these files and the public servants not being in their place of work, having to transition to home? I've had situations where a file was needed and unfortunately they had missed getting it. They had to wait their turn in the queue to come back and get what they had missed, that type of thing. Are they back in their offices? Do you know? Do you think that plays a role in giving good service to our veterans, having the public servants and all of that paperwork and whatnot in the same place at the same time?
I did not assess that, and I cannot comment on whether or not the employees for Veterans Affairs are back in their workplace and the impact that that might have. I do believe that individuals can be very effective from a workplace, whether it be at your home, whether it be in a building downtown. I do believe that there's efficiencies to be gained. I do know that some of the impacts that we saw was if the files are on site and an individual was at home, then yes, that would probably cause a delay. That you need to protect the confidentiality of information,
Exactly.
and so there is, likely it's caused some issues in processing of applications.
Well, I know they did say when they spoke with us that the training side of it actually was very, very effective to be able to train people
Virtually.
over virtually, right? So, okay, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. You can hold it up.
Because you have 15 seconds left, so that's why I did it.
Comment that all of the offices were opened in 2016 by the current government. And here we are.
Thank you so much. And now for 5 minutes, I'd like to invite MP Torrance Rogers. Please.
Mr. Chair, given the time, I have further obligations that I had after 5:30, so I move adjournment.
I have a motion of adjournment on the floor. I have no choice to move it. Est-ce qu'il y a...
Are there any objections to adopt the motion? If there are objections, we can do a recorded division. Any objections? No objections. Thank you very much. Motion carried. However, please hold on just one moment. We'll take the time to thank our witnesses who came in to meet with us today. On behalf of the members of the committee and on my own behalf, thank you to the Office of the Auditor General. We heard from Ms. Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada, and a chartered professional accountant as well, Mr. Martin Dompierre, Assistant Auditor General, and Ms. Isabelle Marcellet, Director. Thank you for coming today to meet with us. Is it the committee's pleasure to adjourn? Meeting adjourned. Thank you.